Ada yang bisa saya pinjam handphonenya untuk itu waktu?
Ya betul dipakai HP-nya keluar.
Masuk kiri, coba cek dulu, nyalain.
Iya, Pak, masuk.
Tadi lihat kifit terus.
Kenapa dia punya masuk?
Dia makin gendut kifit terus.
Ini apa bedanya?
Tadi keluar ke kamar.
Cicok pombe.
For too long, ethnic Chinese communities in Southeast Asia have been caught in a precarious position, often stereotyped as outsiders or loyal to a distant Beijing. Historically, this has led to discrimination, scapegoating, and exclusion in their own homelands. When China pushes for outreach programs like Finding Your Root Streets or business ties specifically tailored to overseas Chinese descendants, it really amplifies the suspicions about their dual loyalty and confirming to the non-Chinese in Southeast Asia that they are not part of us, they're not here for the country. For example, in Malaysia, ethnic Chinese have repeatedly been portrayed in a political rhetoric as being more faithful to foreign interests whenever they engage heavily with Chinese cooperation. Similarly, in Indonesia, past anti-Chinese riots were fueled by fears that local Chinese communities were linked to external powers and that these ethnic Chinese community are in Indonesia to take away economic opportunity from pribumi and enslaving them for their exploitative pursuit to Bumi Pertiwi resources. This crucially highlights how perceived alignment with Beijing can become a lightning rod for xenophobic violence to these communities. By deliberately stepping away from these overtures, be it rejecting special scholarship, declining business incentives, or publicly affirming cultural identities distinct from mainland China, ethnic Chinese Southeast Asians can safeguard themselves from political weaponization. They can reduce the risk of being labeled as a proxy for Chinese foreign policy. We can foster much better trust and deeper integration within the local societies. Our stance is simple, that ethnic Chinese communities in Southeast Asia identify first and foremost with their home countries. They are part of the national fabric, speaking local languages, embracing local cultures, and contributing to the nation's progress. Aggressive distancing from China ensure that they can truly stand as a Malaysian, Indonesian, or Thais without the cloud of external suspicion or influence. They become one with their homeland with no question as to where their loyalty lies. We propose the motion. Proposition model is simple. Aggressively distance includes deliberate choices such as publicly rejecting cultural or business outreach, especially coming from PRC, framing their identity as a distinct from mainland Chinese culture, opting out of Chinese-sponsored educational programs, scholarship, or conferences, as well as rejecting invitation to events like Chinese New Year galas aimed at global Chinese, official visits to PRC, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, moving on to my first argument. Why this is more strategic move for ethnic Chinese to prevent political and social backlash in their home countries. But first and foremost, let's understand why ethnic Chinese in Southeast Asia face so much discrimination and skepticism. Historically, local population and government have viewed Chinese diasporas as outsiders due to cultural differences and also economic successes. In countries like Malaysia and Indonesia, for example, Chinese communities often dominate certain business sectors, which can breed resentment. In times of economic or political crisis, the blame falls on these communities, fueling further the prejudice. This problem is worsened when Beijing openly courts ethnic Chinese outside of China. People begin to suspect that these communities are an extension of Chinese influence. Now the question becomes, why it is so hard for them to challenge these negative perceptions? 3 reasons. Firstly, long-standing stereotypes. So many of these biases are grounded in a deep historical events such as anti-Chinese riots, colonial era policies, or laws that restrict Chinese cultural practices. Because of these stereotypes exist in public consciousness, it is tough to eliminate with short-term measure. Secondly, Chinese communities have unique cultural differences. So ethnic Chinese have a distinct cultural tradition like language, festivals like Chinese New Year, and cultural association that really stand out. This makes them easy target for Bumi Putra or Pribumi looking to point fingers or accuse them of disloyalty. But number three, China becomes more powerful globally. So as China becomes more influential, local population become more suspicious of any group that may have ties, real or perceived, to the Chinese state, ladies and gentlemen. So now the question becomes, why, by having aggressive distancing, we can necessarily overcome these problems? There are two analyses here. Firstly, when ethnic Chinese communities publicly reject exclusive offers from Beijing, like scholarships or route tours, they send a strong message that our primary loyalty is to our homeland here in Southeast Asia. But number two, this helps undercut the belief that this community are merely Chinese. First, by refusing to participate in events that highlight Chinese state influence, they show local governments, business partners, friends, co-workers, neighbors that they are committed to the society in which they live in, ladies and gentlemen. But let's analyze, what about the status quo? What are ethnic Chinese community doing now, and why doesn't it work? Why it will much better in our side? So there are three analyses here. Firstly, the ethnic Chinese community are just being passive about their heritage and association with China. So many individuals remain silent or neutral about their Chinese heritage. They do not strongly align with China, but they also do not publicly distance themselves. However, this form of neutrality failed to convince people who already suspect them of dual loyalty, so the perceived notion still prevails. But number two, comparatively, the effort of Chinese outreach program is just more powerful and feasible. So some ethnic Chinese try to adopt local languages, speaking with Betawi accent or Buginese language, or involving more in local cultural practices, but this alone can be overshadowed by large-scale Chinese government outreach, which local communities interpret as a proof of a continued ties. But number three, government has very limited policy in dealing with this kind of issues. So in some countries, like Indonesia or Malaysia, anti-discrimination law exists, but they do not fully address social or cultural suspicion. Changing laws might help on paper, but prejudice and stereotypes can still survive in day-to-day life. So we need a bolder approach. Ethnic Chinese community must not just be neutral. They must take active steps to challenge the narrative that is shouldered onto them. Only by aggressively distancing themselves from China can ethnic Chinese in Southeast Asia effectively challenge historical stereotypes, political scapegoating, and prevent further discrimination. This is how they can show beyond any doubt that they can stand with their home countries and are fully integrated with the members of the society in their homeland. With all of this reason, we beg to propose.
Ayo lanjut. P1 oposisi. Guys, yes itu. Lupa
Kalau kemudian drop lagi ini enggak
Ya, karena
Boleh, itu mau dapat.
ya, mulai.
But the fact that the arguments that are coming from the government side of the house is to actually resolve this kind of issue by them being Indonesians, not ethnic Chinese Indonesian, by not Chindo, is actually problematic in the very first place. Because you cannot change the structural issues by this means of cutting the opportunities for them to grow, we are cutting the opportunities for them to be better and to live better in the in their country itself by changing the by cutting their opportunities to be their ethnicities, right? So what does this opportunity look like, right? China is a big country. China is a big country that has the potential to actually come in the future to beat the US, as an example, to potentially overtake the domination from US, right? So they have interest to actually have a great economy, right? They have the interest to actually dominate the world, right? They have the capacity to do so, right? Now, here are several reasons. First, that they have the stable economy, that they have the human resource, they have the manufacturing industry to actually build those economy so they can be stable. Second, the infrastructure that has been developed from that economy is greater, right? In comparable to US, is maybe much more better. By the example of this DeepSeek AI being developed, right? This is an example where the infrastructure there is so much better with a cheaper price, right? So this infrastructure like education, like healthcare, like something else, right? They can improve their lives. This ethnicity can be better if they achieve those opportunities, right? Third reason is just if they accept this opportunity, they will have great life. They will have a education matter that they have the same quality of the US and opportunity to live better than their own country, right? So the more characterizations that Chinese community is supportive, right? As an example, maybe you have seen Chinatown. Maybe you have seen ethnic group that live the same place in some town, right? Like in New York, as an example, right? So that means first they can celebrate their culture. They have tightness within their family that they can literally support their own ethnicity, right? But those kind of things actually have some problematic issues, right? The framing from the opposition side of the house is simple, right? There's a massive discrimination that happened that severely to this ethnic Chinese, right? First, they're viewed as an immigrant. They're viewed as someone that do not belong in those countries, right? They take away jobs. They take away resource. They take away something that valuable to the natives, right? As an example, maybe if they come to US, they take away jobs in CS major, in computer science major. They take away Silicon Valleys. They Indonesia, as an example, in 1988. In 1998 incident, as an example, like they're being treated discriminatively because they have TOEFL, as an example, right? The second reason is they receive these rooted discriminations by people that constantly comparing them to China, right? They have endured those kind of discriminative thoughts into their life in those kind of countries, right? So as a government of China, right, we support this kind of incentive from China to actually help these people that have suffered in their own country. We have to actually give our hands to these people so that they can thrive and actually make better in their life, right? So maybe the government of the house says that, okay, there's so many successful Chinese, there's so many rich Chinese, there's so many. Take an example like those 9 dragons. As an example, they say those are the Chinese that are actually successful. Those are the Chinese that actually work hard enough to overcome those kind of discriminative thoughts from the native countries, as an example. What happens to those Chinese ethnicity that cannot overcome that? They cannot work enough, double work enough than the native itself, right? They have struggled to find jobs. They have struggled to actually live comfortably into those discrimination. They have struggled to have educations that are good, right? So we support this kind of help from the China because first it prevents them to actually we do not want to cut down all the possibility of China to help this kind of ethnicity, to help these kind of people that are vulnerable in those countries, right? We don't want to take away those opportunities to help to develop themselves, right? But like first, like they want to achieve higher degree, they want to achieve masters or PhD as an example. Like China have those kind of resources, China have those kind of quality that have been really advancing, right? Maybe the same with Europe's quality, right? Maybe less expensive than actually in Harvard, for example, in Oxford, right? And then they have offered those kind of possibility to this Chinese ethnic, not ethnic, to this Chinese ethnic Chinese, right? So they can improve themselves, they can achieve those higher educations, right? We want them to actually escape those stagnancy in their life, to escape those kind of discriminations that they have in their oppressed life, right? Secondly, we want them to actually thrive in their, if they have business as an example, we want them to accept our support in business, so that maybe China can actually give some incentive like money as an example to develop their business, to develop their entrepreneurship as an example, so they can thrive better, so they can live better, so they can have their own profit, and they can literally thrive in those countries, right? Second argument, this will come in the political side of the society, right? So this the framing I'll give you, they're being discriminated severely, right? So they don't really have support in their political power in their country, right? As an example, they don't have representative, right, in the politics, right? Maybe you mentioned Ahok, but Ahok doesn't really sit that because he worked hard enough. What are those that don't work hard enough? We want to help them to actually achieve those policies. We want China to actually give incentives so they can change the policies. That's my speech. Thank you.
Oke, lanjut. Second OG.
Siapa ini?
Nah.
Oh, pakai.
Boleh pegang?
Kamu siapa nih? Jijik banget.
Hey,
Sorry.
Makanya tadi kalau nggak ada yang agak lama. Tidak ada gunanya. Tidak ada degenerate. Rindu.
Anu men, sebenarnya main pakai stage going ya radiasinya men.
Iya kayak Nile, you're the weird one now, yang artinya normal nih. Lu buat lagi. Aduh, mantap. Oke.
The opposition team frames the solution to the problem of discrimination as if China will help all of their citizens in the ethnic Chinese community outside of their citizenship, outside of their country, as if they can help all of them. It sounds like the opposition team make it sound like the program that they are giving out is going to help them in every aspect of their life, in their education, healthcare community. It's almost like they're trying to bring back the people from outside of the country back to China. It's almost like they're sounding like they try to bring back their people, even though their citizenship directly legally shows that they're a citizen of other countries, of Indonesia, of Malaysia, of Thailand, etc., etc. Now, they also say that we are by supporting this motion, we are actually cutting down the opportunities for China to help, and instead it will actually help if we actually accept this. But for this, I have a couple of responses. First of all, they say that to escape discrimination, they want to escape discrimination, that the discrimination in the status quo in their homeland is problematic and it's big, and for them to escape this, they will accept help from their motherland, from China, etc., etc. But first of all, I want to challenge the notion that discrimination cannot be fixed. Acceptance can happen, even though discrimination happens in the status quo, even though discrimination does still happen in the status quo. Acceptance is possible. Acceptance isn't something that it is completely impossible to the point that you need to completely run away from the problem and instead of trying to face it. An example of acceptance that does happen in the status quo is how even people who are considered Chinese Indonesian are still accepted to go to public national schools, and they're able to. They are still able to be friends and commune with other students. Yes.
Yeah, ethnic Chinese minorities that are forced to go through periods of integration, like changing into Islam, still gets actively discriminated even in your side of the house. What's the delta then?
Thank you for the POI. For those who are completely discriminated, I agree that both sides that happened on both sides of the house. But why it actually helps on our side of the house will be explained. Has been explained by my first speaker, and I will explain it even more on my extensions. But the short version of it is basically by directly rejecting our roots, we are actually showing that the people that hey we are not that so different. It reduces separation, and it actually help them integrate more onto the life and stop making people see them as just another Chinese or a Chinese spy or negative stereotypes. Now back onto my rebuttal. Other than challenging that acceptance can happen, the second I would like to rebuttal is that the fact they make it sound like the Chinese programs are so good, are so beneficial, but the chances of Chinese actually giving those programs isn't that completely beneficial. It's not as idealistic as they make it sound. As idealistic as they make it sound. If you're just a regular ethnically Chinese person, imagine how much ethnically Chinese person there is in at least Southeast Asia. Even in a singular country, there are so many of them, and the chances of the government to give the benefit of those programs to all of those ethnically Chinese communities is either unlikely or impossible, or even if it is possible, the benefits will be bare minimum to completely inefficient at all. And even if the Chinese can't directly change your citizenship or etc., so they can't give them the direct benefit or that the opposition side has stated, because China does not have the incentive to do that. China is known as a very power hungry and money hungry country, and they will take incentive based on what can profit them more. If you're someone like a big athlete that can give direct profit into the country, they will have more incentive to actually give you the most benefits on their programs and actually change your citizenship, etc. But if you're just a regular nobody, if you're just a regular person who has Chinese heritage, the chances of you to get those benefits of those programs are the bare minimum, because China will only see you as just another Chinese. And where does these people live more? The people who are ethnic Chinese community who live in Southeast Asia are most people who descend from those who has left China and goes to this country, and most of the time they don't actually know completely the culture of these China, etc. Most of people in Chinatown, or people who have Chinese heritage, they don't even speak Mandarin. They actually have more experience living in the homeland, because that's where they grow up. That's where they spend more time in. And that's now onto the contributions that our side. Now onto my contributions. First of all is the higher discrimination on the opposition side. Second of all, on how our side actually protects the vulnerable actor. The first side is how the discrimination will actually be worsened on the opposition side. First, my first speaker has already explained how existing views on China in the status quo already happens. And adding on the fact that China's program is seen as just them trying to expand their power and domination globally, it will actually increase the discrimination if these people actually engage more as China. If they don't directly reject their Chinese roots, they will only seen as just another Chinese instead of instead of the homeland citizen, which they are, they will actually actively be denied and discriminated as if like, oh, they're just a Chinese person, they're not one of us. But by these people actively rejecting their Chinese heritage, it will actually show that, hey, I'm one of your people. I'm actually a citizen in Indonesia. It will actually show loyalty to the country that they are exhibiting, and it will actually lessen the discrimination they face, because instead of people seeing them as just another outsider, they will actually see as one of us. And the second contribution that I've mentioned is that our sides actually protect the vulnerable actor, like I've already explained before. And by being more tied in the community, they will actually increase the acceptance in the community, and it will lessen the damage of being harassed in the worst case scenario, that can actually happen in the opposition side. With all those reasons, so proud to propose.
Oke, lanjut. Second out.
Indonesia.
Composition.
Wah, sudah tahu dan
Yang keminggis itu yang keminggis.
3, 2, 1. Beban pembuktian di tim oposisi penutup itu simpel. 1, kita akan buktikan mengapa proposal dari tim pemerintah akan menutup kesempatan Chinese individual untuk menerima banyak bantuan. Dia udah jelasin soal pendidikan, pelatihan skill di bidang teknologi, STEM, bisnis, atau bidang-bidang farmasi yang bisa memberikan mereka manfaat seperti scholarship atau pelatihan. Yang kedua, pekerjaan dan bentuk-bentuk inovasi lainnya. Tapi yang kedua, beban pembuktian yang kedua akan saya elaborasi lebih lanjut di kasus saya. Mengapa status quo itu lebih baik dalam hal kebebasan dalam menentukan pilihan hidup bagi individual dari Chinese ini, dan mempunyai integrasi komunal yang lebih baik. Dan di spesifik kasus ketika China community yang seperti Kak Akbar gambarkan masih harus menghadapi diskriminasi, kenapa peran Mainland China supremasi ini akan sangat-sangat membantu. Oke, tapi saya akan memperjelas kasus G dulu. Apa sih yang dimaksud dengan agresif yang terjadi di dunia pemerintah? 1, yang terjadi adalah mereka akan secara aktif mempromosikan untuk menolak. Artinya secara internal, keluarga akan mempengaruhi anak-anaknya untuk tidak melihat Mainland China sebagai sumber kesempatan lagi. Artinya ketika ada kesempatan, mereka akan secara agresif bilang tidak, dan tidak. Yang kedua, jangan belajar di China misalnya, memperlihatkan bias bad portrayal seolah akan dieksploitasi kalau mereka melakukan itu, akan didoktrin oleh China untuk jadi individual yang buruk misalnya. Tapi kamu juga akan secara aktif memperlakukan orang-orang yang tetap memilih untuk mengambil kesempatan tersebut misalnya. Misal orang-orang yang memang sudah sedepresi itu dan tidak mempunyai kesempatan di tempat mereka tinggal dan mereka memilih. Kamu akan membuat pilihan mereka adalah pilihan yang seperti seolah itu adalah hal yang berdosa, memperparah disintegrasi yang terjadi dalam komunitas China itu sendiri. Padahal di era sekarang di mana US mulai melemah kekuatannya, dominasinya US, dan di dunia sekarang mulai sangat-sangat meningkatkan trustnya ke China. Ini merupakan momentum yang besar untuk terlibat dan mengambil keuntungan secara masif dari hal tersebut. Apa saja yang China lakukan sekarang? Kami udah jelasin soal secara masif memberikan peluang edukasi di universitas ternamanya, atau absolusi tenaga kerja dan memberikan donasi secara aktif dan rutin untuk membantunya nanti. Tapi begini, komunitas di luar China itu sendiri mereka juga aktif memberikan donasi ke komunitas itu karena mereka merasa sedara dan se-culture misalnya. Itu yang membuat hal ini sangat penting untuk diambil. Tapi mari merespon seluruh kasus OG dulu. Urgensi yang dibawa Kak Akbar adalah worst case yang terjadi beratus-ratus tahun lalu, ketika masa kolonialisme membagi manusia ke kasta-kasta, pribumi, Londo, dan Chinese misalnya. Bahkan dulu pun Chinese itu bukan di kasta terbawah, tapi mereka lebih tinggi dari pribumi. Jadi kami nggak ngerti kenapa separah itu yang digambarkan. Seluruh hal ini sebenarnya udah nggak relevan lagi. Tapi mari tetap merespon. Ini tuh nggak benar, Dewa Juri. Fakta bahwa China sekarang secara politik bebas berpartisipasi di pemerintah. Ahok jadi gubernur dan politisi yang di-respect at the end of the day. Kedua, bahkan Imlek juga sekarang jadi nasional hari raya. Secara kultural mereka diterima oleh masyarakat dan dirayakan oleh masyarakat. Sekolah-sekolah basis Tionghoa yang bebas beroperasi di Indonesia, di Malaysia misalnya. Mandarin jadi subjek yang wajib dipelajari di kurikulum. Bisnis, investor, penjualan emas, Chinese dominasi semua ini. Ini membuktikan apa? Secara sosiokapital, mereka itu adalah orang-orang yang ter-empower bentuknya. Jadi ini nggak benar ketika mereka menggambarkan sedrastis itu hamnya. Tapi yang kedua, kalaupun orang-orang masih menghadapi prejudis di beberapa tempat, kami kami rasa solusinya bukan menolak dan memisahkan diri dari Mainland China, tapi meningkatkan pelajaran inklusivitas dari culture tersebut, value untuk saling merespek, semangat integrasi dan gotong royong. Ini sangat possible di konteks-konteks di mana multi diverse culture, misalnya kayak Indonesia dan Malaysia, bahwa kan ada Chinatown di masing-masing daerah mereka. Ini artinya ini artinya sangat-sangat possible untuk terjadi. Tapi gini, sisi mereka tuh akan lebih parah lagi kalau misalnya konteks Akbar dibeli sama juri, karena ya udah mereka dibenci sama pribumi misalnya, tapi mereka juga secara agresif memutus perikatan dengan China Mainland China. Artinya ketika mereka udah selemah itu posisinya, nggak akan ada bantuan eksternal yang bisa diandalkan lagi, karena mereka akan secara masif menjelek-jelekan pemerintahan Mainland, menolak dan belagak bisa hidup sendiri di sisi mereka. Setidaknya apa yang terjadi di sisi kami ketika itu terjadi? Ketika kamu udah gak tahan karena udah diopres oleh prejudis dengan keadaan yang digambarkan OG, opsi pindah terbuka lebar, kamu akan tetap diterima dengan konteks lain yang udah diberikan, atau opsi bahwa pemerintah China punya highly incentive untuk peduli dengan kehidupan community China di luar Mainland China. Karena konteks apalagi kenapa impossible? Kami akan berikan kalian livelihood. Konteks Indo ekonominya interdependensi. Karena sektor-sektor di mana sektor-sektor dominasi yang kita realize pada ekonomi seperti infrastruktur, juga penunjangan pinjaman negara itu sangat-sangat reliance on China. Jadi ketika China ingin instill suatu policy, suatu kebijakan terhadap kesejahteraan masyarakat yang secara historically terikat dengan mereka, ini sangat possible karena mereka punya keterikatan. Tapi di sisi mereka, keterikatan itu diputus. Jadi nggak ada insentif China untuk peduli, ya kamu mati aja di tempat itu dan nggak bisa lagi. Itu udah meruntuhin seluruh kasus mereka. Tapi sebelum saya lanjut kontribusinya.
Trennya sekarang di Indonesia adanya peningkatan ultranasionalisme, artinya masyarakat etnik Tiongkok yang dianggap bukan bagian dari identitas Indonesia bakal didiskriminasi. Orang-orang ini perlu dirinya dari diskriminasi dengan asimilasi kedekatan budaya yang lebih dekat ke negara di mana mereka tinggal.
Saya rasa kamu tetap bisa melakukan itu karena ketika kamu menjadi Cindo misalnya, kamu tetap punya rasa nasionalisme yang bisa kalian ambil. Tapi kalaupun misalnya mereka tetap teropresi, ya pilih di worst case scenario, ya kami udah bilang mereka punya opsi untuk pindah ke negara lain. Jadi tetap aman-aman aja. Nah, gini, saya akan jelasin juga kenapa disintegrasi dalam komunitas itu penting. Jadi integrasi itu sangat penting di konteks ketika kita bicara soal minoritas, karena satu, itu akan menjadi safety haven mereka. Cuman mereka berkeluh kesah misalnya ketika mereka teropres dan in terms of political power atau hal-hal sepertinya itu. Yang kedua, jadi ketika mereka punya sense of komunitas yang bagus, mereka akan punya mereka bisa menginisiasi gerakan sosial dan punya lebih besar bargaining power-nya untuk melawan hal-hal yang tadi dijelaskan kabar. Nah, tapi di worst case scenario, jika justru kalau Akbar mau polisi yang lebih diverse ke etnis China di Southeast, prerequisite-nya ialah butuh backingan power yang sangat besar. Kalau Akbar kontekstualisasi bahwa Chinese people sangat oppressed dan akan full dengan prejudice, ya solusinya adalah cari bantuan dari luar. Nah, makanya penting banget nih untuk punya peran dan koneksi historically dengan orang-orang China di luar yang punya lebih besar political power. Bangga sebagai apa sih?
Iyo.
Closing gas.
Oh my gosh. Aduh.
Nihal.
Iya, kita baru 89 tadi. Ada ini sosial kredit loh. Dari sosial kredit. Dari sosial kredit.
Sistem kredit sosialnya di sini.
Oh, dia mau ambil cewek-cewek itu lagi. Apa sih?
Ada meme-nya.
Ada meme.
Ada meme-nya juga.
Memulai pidato dalam 3, 2, 1. Tarik dulu kenapa banyak sekali Chinese tersebar di seluruh dunia. Ya ini karena kegagalan pemerintah China yang diktator dan membiarkan masyarakatnya kelaparan sampai mereka harus ke luar negeri untuk mencari penghidupan. Jadi buruk ketika mereka yang stay di China harus survive segitu beratnya, tapi ketika China maju, China malah pikir orang yang berkhianat. Ini yang harus menjadi beban pembuktian kenapa itu buruk status quo. Masuk ke perbedaan kami dengan Oji. Kalau Oji bahwa ini buruk kepada Chinese people itu sendiri, Xi lah yang bawa kenapa dengan aggressive distance ini bukan hanya menyelamatkan Chinese people, tapi juga menyelamatkan orang-orang China di mainland dan menyelamatkan pemerintahan pada keseluruhannya. Tapi sebelum itu, beberapa respon untuk OO. Kalau OO bawa soal opportunity tentang kehidupan yang baik, kami rasa ini hoax karena mereka keluar dari China pada dasarnya untuk seek for a better life. Kembalinya pun mereka ke China akan hanya tinggi persaingan dengan China pada akhirnya. Maka dari itu, mereka mending ketika sudah ada 3-4 generasi di Indonesia tetap stay di Indonesia karena sudah sustain, sudah terjaga. Buruk ketika Perindo, Pak Haritanu Sudibyo harus kembali ke China Mainland ketika dia sudah sustain dengan MNC di Indonesia. 2, soal diskriminasi. Di status quo, diskriminasi itu tidak ada karena banyak orang yang bersahabat. Kita menganggap mereka sebagai orang Indonesia, sebagai orang Malaysia. Bahkan China Singaporean tidak pernah identifikasi diri mereka sebagai Chinese, tapi mereka selalu identifikasi diri sebagai Singaporean. Itulah kenapa CEO TikTok di US parliamentary selalu bilang diri dia adalah Singaporean. Dia menolak dia adalah seorang Chinese. 3, ketika bahas soal pembukaan kesempatan dan ambil keuntungan, ada 2 alasan kenapa ini tidak terjadi. 1, tidak terjadi karena kebijakan yang sebenarnya ada itu tokenistik. Mereka adalah warga negara Indonesia, jadi kalau kesempatan diberikan kepada mereka untuk berkembang di Cina, yang untungnya Indonesia kalau mereka balik. Tapi skenario kedua, kalaupun mereka balik menjadi warga negara Cina, ini juga buruk karena ya mereka juga nggak bakal berkembang. Saingan di Cina banyak dengan many advance, karena pada dasarnya Cina negara yang maju. 2, soal kultur, makanya karena kultural dan sosiokapital mereka sangat empower di negara asalnya, maka dari itu beri mereka untuk tetap stay di negara asalnya. Tapi sebelum itu, Arifah.
1, konteks keluar dari China itu dulu masa perang. Ini cuma konteks sekarang, bagaimana globally connected. 2, kau nggak perlu ganti warga negara untuk ambil opportunity-nya.
Iya, makanya karena warga negara mereka tidak berubah, makanya itu tokenistik. Karena pada dasarnya ketika warga negara mereka tetap stay di Indonesia, ya udah berarti keuntungan perkembangan itu bakal balik ke Indonesia. Makanya China nggak bakal punya insentif untuk sebesar itu untuk memberikan bantuan kepada orang-orang China ini. Satu, ya memang karena sudah lama, berarti mereka sudah sustain di negara tersebut. Untuk apa balik ke negara asal? Dia bahkan pada dari awal tidak peduli dengan kamu. Maka dari itu masuk ke argumen. Kenapa ini akan buruk bagi Chinese ethnic itself? Ini sudah dijelasin sama Oji kenapa mereka diskriminatif dan arogansi. Tapi bagaimana analisisnya? Mereka bukan pure Chinese at all. Ada akulturasi budaya. Mereka sudah menikah dengan orang Bugis, mereka sudah menikah dengan orang Jawa. Jadi cinta mereka tidak sepure itu. Maka dari itu, ketika mereka kembali, diskriminasinya akan semakin besar karena mereka bukan orang Chinese Mainland dan mereka juga bukan lagi pure darah Chinese. Tidak kenapa? Bahkan orang Chinese Mainland sangat diskriminatif kepada orang-orang di Taiwan, padahal mereka sama-sama pure Chinese. Inilah bukti kenapa ini akan buruk ke Chinese people ketika mereka mengambil kesempatan yang sangat besar. 2, ketika mereka diundang di session parliamentary dan dianggap sebagai orang Chinese, ini buruk kepada Chinese di Mainland. Kenapa? Mereka yang stay, mereka yang berusaha untuk mengembangkan negaranya sendiri, malah habis manis sepah dibuang, dianggap tidak penting bagi pemerintah karena pemerintah terlalu fokus untuk mengambil Chinese Mainland. Itulah kenapa diskriminasi akan lebih buruk karena Chinese Mainland akan berpikir bahwasanya pemerintahnya lebih peduli kepada orang-orang Chinese pada umumnya. 2, kenapa? Argumen kedua tentang kenapa identitas itu tidak penting. Mereka itu sudah 3-4 generasi di sini. Mereka identifikasi diri as Southeast people, balik ke akulturasi budaya, dan itu membuat identitas asli mereka tidak penting. Itulah kenapa saya akan menganggap diri sebagai orang Makassar dibanding Bugis karena ya saya lahir di sini. Begitu juga analoginya kepada orang Chinese yang menganggap diri mereka Indonesia karena nenek mereka lahir di sini, orang tua mereka lahir di sini. Krisis identitas bakal buruk di sisi kamu karena ketika mereka sudah dari awal didiskriminasi di status quo, lalu didiskriminasi di status quo, dan sekarang sudah sustain setelah diskriminasi yang berpanjang di tahun 90-an, malah kamu tarik mereka kembali sehingga ya diskriminasi akan tambah buruk di sisi kamu. Lalu argumen terakhir dan argumen terakhir untuk mematahkan semua argumen dari tim pemerintah soal bagaimana ini tidak akan berhasil pada akhirnya. Mari dalami dulu soal diskriminasi dan ambil semua skenario dari kedua sisi. Ketika mereka lari dari mainland, itu kan over capacity dan mereka mau cari yang terbaik, makanya mereka banyak yang lari ke Singapura. Di sini mereka sudah didiskriminasi oleh Chinese mainland karena dianggap mengkhianati negara, arogan dan diskriminatif. Di negara mereka berasal, di dua lini negara mereka berasal, mereka mau dibunuh karena dianggap penjajah, mengambil kesempatan, sehingga mereka sedari dulu banyak menghadapi berbagai macam diskriminasi. Ya, jadi kedua sisi diskriminasi itu simetris. Tapi kenapa diskriminasi di sisi kami setidaknya lebih baik? Karena satu, mereka sudah terbiasa hidup di Indonesia. Mereka sudah ada akulturasi budaya. Mereka sudah dianggap orang-orang yang sebagai Indonesian, bukan Chinese people. Setidaknya di sisi mereka, karena sudah ada akulturasi budaya sudah lama, mereka sudah dianggap sebagai orang di situ. Maka dari itu kami ingin tetap menjauh supaya kami dianggap bersahabat dengan homeland. Karena kesempatan justru lebih baik ketika kita menjauh, karena sebenarnya soal kesempatan itu simetris, banyak sekali kesempatan dari pemerintah, kesempatan dari negara lain, sehingga soal kesempatan itu tidak penting. Maka dari itu untuk menyelamatkan Chinese people, kami bangga untuk begitu besar.
Ya lanjut. Oke, next. Oke.
Di hari tanggal 31 tuh, oke guys, itu tanggal 30.
Nasional itu kan jadi oke guys oke guys. Nasionalisme tanpa batas.
Okay, POI in 5 minutes left. Alright. What's the next issue? 3, 2, 1. If simply going to a Chinese university makes you Chinese, then Anis is American because he went to university in the US. The extension doesn't make sense, right? So I want to extend the contextualization that happens within the debate because I think the debate is kind of deadlocked on whether or not Chinese people are accepted or not. I think it exists in a spectrum, and it is the extension that we will introduce you in closing opposition. Let us just say that ethnic Chinese minorities that gets acceptance, like Arifa explained, only exists in Jakarta, only exists in Bandung, only exists in Surabaya, where the culture is quite liberal and acceptance is quite extensive. It is the ethnic Chinese minorities that lives in Palu, that lives in Majo, that lives in exclaves in Bone, who have to be forced to live in a culture that is highly conservative, that needs representation, that needs a protection. We take the spectrum of the context and we will give you the middle ground, because all kind of shot themselves in the foot, because if they say that Chinese people are accepted to that extent, therefore the urgency of accepting Chinese help becomes marginal. So we think that OG's concept is fair, and we will flip that on itself and prove to you why the urgency is actually on the other side. So the difference with OO, they talk about economic capacity that China is high. The non-engagement in the context of OG makes it kind of confusing. We will frame the debate without the trade-off of economy and culture, because they kind of concede about that they get the economic benefit but not necessarily the culture. And the pure Kakbar gives of ultra-nationalism is exactly what is going to use, because the ultra-nationalism that exists actively gets mitigated or check and balance in places like Jakarta because of the liberal culture, but it does not get mitigated in places like Palu and other cities. So a couple of responses to OG first. I talk about the discrimination that happens as a result of making yourself closer to China. We said that discrimination still exists regardless, independent from the debate, because like they mentioned and frame out in the top half, that it exists historically prior to the motion, not necessarily because they claim that they are Chinese, but because of their facial features, because their eyes look different, because they don't go to mosques to pray, they go to churches, they go to Imlek and pray for an entirely different cultural system. So even in their world, and it exists in cultural status quo, even Chinese Muslims still gets actively discriminated simply because their skin color is different. So the discrimination is not happens because of the dual nationality that opening government frames. It is much more simpler than that, i.e. it is the facial features or the physicality that get actively discriminated. So the different cultures and religion that they talk about is actually flipped. It is on head. So the only way to kind of get their benefit of integration is actually to completely change the culture itself. So it's not integration necessarily that they want to do. It's a complete erasure of Chinese culture in their side of the house. You can no longer go for things like Imlek. You cannot necessarily go to churches and pray. You have to convert to Islam for you to be able to be accepted in its entirety, but even then you still get actively discriminated. Second response, they talk about, we cannot help all Chinese people. I kind of don't understand why they bring this, because A, there are a lot of economic incentive to do so, because if there's no economic incentive to do so, the debate doesn't run. But second, you have to accept the fiat to some extent that China is capable to do this, because the harm for them to run, for all of the image of Chinese people to be bad, you need China to be as strong as possible. So they kind of shot themselves in the foot with that analysis. So what is the extension that we'll give you? We say that exactly because China is a global economy that will exist in Manchester on either side of the house, I think it's the other way around. We should be more open to Chinese influence. Because we argue that the type of global reputation of China is actually the other way around. First, alternative is much worse. I would argue that hatred towards the US is much more significant, i.e. imperialism, colonialism, but second, I would argue that exactly because of Donald Trump and the ultra-nationalist tariff that he introduced right now, I would argue that there are a lot of incentives for you to be closer to China as opposed to the US, because the alternative is much worse. The rise of China, I would argue, is a much more positive outlook because A, you get much more economic opportunities because China is investing right now in Indonesia. But second, the debate is not about ethnic Chinese culture in Jakarta. We argue it's much more important to talk about in secondary cities who get much more investment. We will prove to you why the investments exactly we get much more acceptance of Chinese ex-slaves in places like Palu. Because the incentives of anti-discrimination laws that Akbar talks about is exactly because of the bubble of culture that exists in these spaces. I would argue that the economic incentives to improve the city as a whole improves the reputation of Chinese communities that becomes the middleman of Chinese corporations coming into the cities. What are our extension then? Why do we get much more economic opportunities for secondary cities or Chinese exclave in small cities, which helps ethnic Chinese acceptance, not integration? But let's take integration out of the debate. Why the counterfactual of integration is principally abhorrent. The identity crisis that Aura talks about only exists insofar the context in the other house, where you frame that integration is the mandatory and the only thing that you can do. I would argue that in our side of the house, the idea of dual nationality should exist because the acceptance of you having multiple culture at the same time. And this exists insofar in status quo. That you can be Bugis, for example, that you can be Chinese, but I don't understand why that doesn't necessarily extend to Chinese culture as well. Yeah, fine.
The problem with Chinese Surabayan is that they are seen as an elite. They are secluded. Therefore, in order to improve their acceptance, they need to engage more with the local. Therefore, they should distance away from China. Don't you agree?
Yeah, but other Surabayan elites who are not Chinese gets actively integrated with them. And even if Chinese elites in Surabaya still exist, I would argue that it exists in a spectrum. I would argue that not all Chinese in Surabaya is rich. I would probably assume that there are a lot of them still middle class and still integrate with society at large. Why do we get much more economic opportunities outside the house? Let's talk about the identity crisis. Let's talk about the context first. Why integration is bad? Because at status quo you still get discriminated anyway when you integrate, and this happens exclusively in small cities, and therefore I think this the debate that is the delta that we give you. So for the integration to work, you have to completely strip any form of Chinese culture. What is principally abhorrent? For the other reasons that I tell you. One, people have universal right to their own culture, but second, utility-wise, I would argue that if we take the context of Chinese people that are being actively discriminated, I would argue that their culture is their own safe place, it's their own sense of happiness, it's their own way of gaining all of the happiness in period of discrimination. Why we get much more acceptance in terms of the house. I would argue that economic development exists in secondary cities where ethnic Chinese communities can get a lot more bargaining position in their own relation to Chinese companies. I would argue that a local government in Palu, for example, have much more incentives to represent Chinese people in order for them to get much more economic incentive. And this trickles down to any other policy, i.e. things like cultural policy as well. For example, like allowing them to build churches which otherwise exist in status quo, allowing them to publicly pray Imlek and whatever. For all these reasons, proud to oppose. Here.
Okay, go boy.
That's a extension. Yang bagi position staff. Yang ini.
Tapi jelas banget sekarang.
Ya, nggak apa-apa itu masuk di. Tapi mekanismenya bisa jadi biasanya bisa jadi macam. Bisa dari sana.
Dia dulu kecap ke sana.
Ya,
Lu coba kecap tuh sebentar.
bisa ya.
Bisa jadi lombok.
Bisa dikit.
Nengen di bagian Cina maju. Ada yang di mana?
Bagian Cina wajahnya.
Cina
Ayo, biar sipit-sipit aja tahu. Memang ini.
Kami tahu Cina kakak.
Cina pakaran. Memang kalau diskriminasi dikatain kan.
Cina.
Saya Cina.
Ditanya tentang kita. Itu masalahnya itu.
Apa itu? Saya udah lihat. Saya
Kata
koko.
Jepang.
Oh jadi Jepang.
Starting my argument in 3, 2, and 1. First of all, I would like to rebuttal most of the case in team opposition's case. In case of this having the capacity to give the opportunities to counteract with my first speech's argument. But as we proposed in the first place, that Chinese government has a dark past. With their own understanding, Chinese government believes that you must go through further to even going back to their mainland. Consists with includes with the most cases that impacts mostly horribly. But even if you believe yourselves as ethnically Chinese, you wouldn't be able to receive those opportunities in the first place due to the fact that the most policy in Chinese mainland has a policy to limit their stance and their opportunities given to their Chinese descendants. Due to the reason that ethnically Chinese that born in Southeast Asia has the reason to being incapable of being qualified to receive these opportunities. Now, the Chinese government still has the policy to understand within giving incentive or support to Chinese ethnicities, but still does not apply to those who are born in Southeast Asia, especially if the Southeast Asia has a history with the Chinese government. Now, I wanted to also open up that China is a beloved and is well known to their intense discipline and vast culture that spreads throughout the Southeast Asia and of course especially the world. But behind that wealthy country comes with an extreme country that conducts most horrific ways to cover their dark side. Although China is pushing through dictatorship throughout the years and conducts discrimination most likely and less likely parted from Southeast Asia. On their part of the side of what team opposition consists with arguments that consist that countries within that ethnically Chinese people born in Southeast Asia are more conclusively induced to or to prone to any discrimination whatsoever. But first of all, they're partly independent countries with ethnic Chinese identities, or their race, foremost they're Chinese, but Chinese perceives them as themselves as their country that they were born in, such as if they were from Indonesia, including Malaysia or Thailand. In other case, the stereotypes. In other case, Chinese has in the status quo, Chinese are passive to foreign countries that even has an ethnically Chinese. So there is no further reason to reach back to your goal, to reach to your roots, despite being ethnically Chinese. Other than that, I also wanted to point out that the Chinese descendants that are already born in Southeast Asia did not know any better to understand the harshful reality of their mainland. As explained before, from the first speaker and the second speaker, and opening and closing government as already proposes, the Chinese government from then until now, multiple dynasty and dictatorship pushes through controversies and it prevents them from it prevents their citizens to their well-being. Most of the Southeast Asia countries had already established a well-known Chinatown at a location that provided by the Southeast Asia governments to initiate the Chinese cultural perseverance. So there is no reason whatsoever to ever coming back to the Chinese mainland in the first place. Chinese has already built their connection with their well-established countries. From therefore on, team opposition also understands that Chinese Chindos who had already converted to Islam but the team opposition implying that there are no changes whatsoever regarding prior to discrimination or racism. But nonetheless, their religion, causes a psychological mutual situation where most religious brothers will conceive to them as their part of their own. The chance of there being discrimination happens in an highly unlikely due to the fact that their religions have psychological impact on how it protects themselves to these Muslim chindos. Their Muslim brothers still consider it as their own. And the other case, conclusively, our side has already adapted to Southeast. Conclusively, our side has already proposes that ethnically Chinese has already proposes. Already adapted to Southeast Asia countries. They believe their countries are still to their countries where they were born in. Other than that, I also wanted to point out that the closing opposition that concludes that believes that racism still exists nonetheless, even if you change your religion. But in truth, team opposition demonizes this fact and furthers the reason to much further to racism. But in reality, social structures, as spoken from the second government, second team opposition before, that only applies when you force yourselves or from the media itself. So therefore, the psychological issue that the team opposition has already proposes, that racism only conducts whenever you force yourselves to believe in that there are social structures, or that you believe in the media itself, because due to the media being manipulative and such. So you're pointing your argument to irrelevance. Due to the outside factor of discrimination, but truthfully, most mindsets believes that inclusivity, nonetheless, with their racial structures and their racial beliefs. So, as the team opposition proposes.
Okay, thank you. Let's finish the debate. Open.
If the metric of beneficial in opening bench is whether or not ethnic Chinese community can be accepted, we say the metric is how these communities can use these opportunities as effective as possible in closing opposition, right? I think that OG has failed two things in this debate panels. They has failed to explain, one, how the local country will accept them more and how they can be so positive towards the ethnic Chinese communities, right? They always say that the Chinese communities can integrate themselves with the local culture, but they never explain how the local people then will accept the Chinese people that want to integrate themselves, right? Because in fact, no matter or not if you're like if you want to speak like Buginese or like Sundanese, if you still have the facial sculpture of like Chinese heritage, then you will still be racist. Then you still will get hate crimes at the end of the day. But secondly, they never also explain how they will celebrate their culture at the end of the day, right? If you want them to distance themselves so bad from the mainland China, meaning that they cannot celebrate Imlek, they cannot build local Chinese church because it's still integrated with China mainland at the end of the day, meaning that you strip away all their rights to have to celebrate their own culture and religion. There's no justification at all from OG panels. But let's respond to all OG cases better than OO, right? They keep talking about how the strategy is to prevent social backlash. This is exactly all case that's coming from OG. I have three new analysis responses to this. Firstly, This is wrong because local people don't hate Chinese because they're affiliated by China, but local communities, but those local communities in secondary cities get hate crime simply because they have the same appearance of Chinese heritage, right? Then how you can guarantee that these people will never receive any social backlash anymore? But B, you also take away the rights of like celebrating their own culture, right? Meaning that they cannot celebrate like Chinese New Year and all of that. You want them to speak Sundanese and all of that, but they still also have the right to celebrate their own religion panels. They still have the right to speak Mandarin, for example. Even if like not all like Chinese ethnic community Chinese don't speak Mandarin, that is okay because it's within their rights whether or not they want to speak Mandarin or not. But some families speak Mandarin in their own homes, right? Many of my Chinese friends still speak Mandarin within their family because it's something that is integrated with the culture, because they feel home, they feel safe with speaking Mandarin. But lastly then, even if it's true, they will face less social backlash. I think that this only work under two scenarios. Firstly, this only work in big liberal cities such as like Jakarta, for example, or like Bandung, but will not work like conservative cities like Makassar or Palu. But secondly, in secondary cities, their business will also not thrive panels because it's only thrive in local region, and they cannot expand their business in like other big cities. And this is something that we want to. This is the benefit that we champion by working together with the investment that is coming from mainland China. But then, why are we better than OO? I think that for two reasons. Firstly, they haven't proved to you how the local ethnic have the interest to work together with China, right? All cases that is coming from here only talking about how the China have that big superpower country rather than US, but they never explain how the local community will want to work together just because they are that powerful then. But B, they also never explain to you how they can continue to celebrate their culture, right? This is something that is only exclusive to OO, to CO. I mean, that is why you have to credit us. But panels, we prove to you how they have the interest. Secondly, we prove to you how they can have better opportunities. And lastly, how we can still celebrate their culture even better under our side, because people in secondary cities have the opportunities to build their local culture, their local church that is coming from the opportunities of working together with the business people. Before I move to my classes, I will take your
The comparative in our side, instead of accepting scholarship from China, they will rather apply for LPDP. Instead of going for Imlek, they will go probably for Al-Pacar 17-an. So this makes them getting more acceptance rather than amplifying the continued ties with China.
The benefits that is coming from LPDP and scholarship from China is not something that is comparable, because firstly, the scholarship that is coming from China is highly contingent on whether or not you can you can accelerate like the selection that is coming. But LPDP is highly contingent on whether or not you are privileged enough to go to LPDP panels. But secondly, the idea that going to 17-an and going to Imlek or like Chinese New Year is very different, because one is about the ideology of the country, but secondly it's about the cultural ideology of the people. So what is more accepting under our side of the house is that we celebrate. They can choose. They can still go to 17-an, but they can also still celebrate Imlek, which is a part of like their identity, right? Therefore, still irrelevant. But moving to my question, firstly talking about economy benefit, I think that in OG they keep talking about how they want to have economy by integrating yourself with homeland culture. In OO they talk about how China is big and superpower. In CG they talk about how people don't want to go to mainland because they get hate crime, but they also thrive in locally. Panels, I think that what cases that is coming from OG is wrong, because people are still racist to them, right? That firstly. But secondly, those rich elites that Akbar told you is not the vulnerable actor in this debate, right? It doesn't matter if like Surabayan Chinese is that rich, because if they distance themselves, they're still rich anyway. But those Chinese people that come from secondary cities don't have more opportunities if they continue to distance themselves, right? Because they are heavily reliant to like the opportunities that is coming from like China. But also CG that talking about how they still get hate crime in the main country is wrong, because the fact that China distributes scholarship to other countries in South Asian countries, meaning they still want to accept this. They still want to accept this like Chinese people to come to study in China, right? But secondly, the context of Taiwan they bring panels, it's about political reasons, right? They want Taiwan to be a part of China themselves, meaning that they actually want them, right? Not hating the Taiwan Chinese. That's why I don't get the case of like what Aura brings, but thirdly, the idea of like they also thrive in local countries is only exists in big privileged cities, right? This is something that other things have been so dismissive about in this debate. But secondly, this do not trickle down to small cities panels. They only can thrive if they accept business investment from China, right? But let's talk about the weighing then. I think that the weighing is clear how they can only have opportunities if you work with the investment that is coming from China because like clearly if you argue that China don't care that much about local Chinese, this is very wrong because they want to work with local business, right? This is in line with government purpose of like economic development, especially in secondary cities, meaning that investment that is coming from China is actually very beneficial because the local Chinese people can be like the middleman of this and like can attract more investment that is coming because they are a part of like those Chinese heritage at the end of the day. Therefore, under all those reasons, proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you. Finish itu recordingnya.
Ya, juri silahkan.